I'm billed as talking about cybersecurity, but we've already had someone talk about cybersecurity. So I thought I'd broaden it a little bit. And it's the first time I've actually given this talk, so you're the guinea pigs, you're the prototype. And I thought I worry a little bit about the global economic situation. I'll show you in a minute. I worry about the enormous debt that we've acquired, which we can just about sustain at the current level of the current interbank rate of about 1.16. But if we move to the mean, which has been about 5.25 over the last 18 years, then we're in deep trouble. At the moment, we're spending 11% of our GDP on just servicing the debt, paying interest, basically. So if we go to the average, which is 5.25% interest rate, and there is a general tendency to regress to the mean, then we're going to be paying 55% of our GDP to service the debt, which is unsustainable. If we go to the record highs of the 80s, the Carter years, interest rates were 18%. We'd have to pay more than twice what our GDP is just to service the debt. So there is an issue there. Now, I thought it would be interesting to see, can technology rescue us from this impending doom? And I think there's about 5 or 6 areas of technology which you all touched upon, and I know you're all interested in. By the way, can you hear me enough? We'll see if you can still hear me when I go back there. We're going to look at particular drags on the global economy and what I think can relieve those drags. And I try to quantify it. We talk a lot in qualitative terms when we talk about technology. Well, let's try and put some numbers on it. They're as good as any economist's numbers, in other words. They don't call it a dismal science for nothing. It's dismal because usually they're wrong. And secondly, whatever their forecast is usually depressing. But we'll see how this one comes out, because we'll look at different technologies. One is, and their application to 5 particular problems. One, the fact that we waste about 5% of our global GDP, or at least the retail GDP, on the payment system. We're giving money to Visa, American Express, MasterCard, and they're kind of what economists call rent seekers. They're not really adding value. They've just got a machine in place, they take the money, and it's like a tax, a global tax. Another one is corruption. That's like a 35% tax on the entire global economy. People are just taking money out and stashing it in Swiss bank accounts, and it's not helping the economy. Then there's the remittance tax. This is the most painful in a way. We take the money from our poorest, the immigrants. They're shipping it back to poor developing countries and their families there, and that's getting taxed pretty high rate, right about anywhere from 8 to 12%, Western Union, MoneyGram typically. And then there's the enormous theft going on of our IP, which people don't think about much and don't quantify. And then there's the general illiquidity of our IP. I think by applying technology to each of these, we can contribute to the economy. So the question is, will those technologies together be enough to counteract this downward spiral that we're about to head into? And let's start with our debt situation. As you know, we've accumulated enormous debt. Last Friday, we hit $20 trillion. This is just the US here. Now, the reason we're not dead already at that level is because at the same time, our interest rates are a record low. There's been about 0.25%, up to 0.5%, now 1.16%. But there's a statistical reality that over time, we always regress to the mean. It applies to gambling, for instance. People always think the machine's winning and they're going to be ahead. The reason the entire $400 billion gambling industry exists is because people aren't aware of the statistical principle that you always regress to the mean. So over time, if you're a gambler, you're going to lose money. It's just inevitable. And in the same way, we're going to regress to a mean. The interest rates are going to go up, and our service on this debt is going to be very difficult to sustain. So very roughly, a lot of assumptions made. We've got a table of the assumptions. And in fact, what we'll be doing in the future is we'll play with those assumptions and we'll do a sensitivity analysis to see what conditions would cause us to go into a death spiral and what conditions would actually help us thrive. But basically, obviously this would be a very bumpy line because interest rates go up and down a lot. But this is, if you like, a trend line, and it's going to become increasingly extremely expensive around the world as multiple countries. We're not the only one that have acquired so much debt. Japan has even more than we do. And it's going to be a huge drag on the global economy, in literally the tens of trillions of dollars worth. That's the big background to everything we're going to look at. And government's response, this can't be cured with technology. It's basically due to government, poor government. And government's usual response is to print more money. And here's 9 instances where that didn't work out too well. All failed currencies, often in the case of Zimbabwe here, ending up 10 billion to 1 in terms of the amount of inflation they'd acquired. So the question is, what technology could help? Cybersecurity, cryptocurrency, blockchain, IP management technology that we're particularly interested in working on. And we don't need to spend time on this, so we'll go into this in more detail anyway. And we don't need to talk about assumptions, but we think they're fairly reasonable. We're assuming that it's going to take 8 years to get to the median. Hopefully that's pessimistic. Hopefully interest rates will stay much, much lower. But if they get there in that kind of time frame, we have a challenge. Then we look at things like how long will it take. The technology exists, we'll show you in a minute, to eliminate corruption. Basically, a project I worked on in the past was to develop a national state-sponsored cryptocurrency, which is a really effective way to eliminate corruption in a country. We're talking to Ukraine about that. Who knows what will happen? It's probably one of, I think it's about 3rd or 4th most corrupt country in the world. Some people in government want to change that. You just need the combination of the right technology, someone in government who can affect things, and you can actually do it. I think we'll see it. The first country will be the real breakthrough, then it will ripple to other countries. So the assumption we make there is that that'll take about 12 years to reduce corruption by about a half. Maybe that's naive and ambitious. This is a heat map of corruption. It's no surprise where you see the big blob of red. Russia, China, much of Africa, much of South America. But we can't really be too smug about the yellow indicating low corruption here. My personal belief is that our government is just as corrupt as most of these others. We've just institutionalized it, and basically we've just made corruption legal. We just call it PACs and lobbyists, and so our corruptors are better dressed. They wear Gucci shoes, they're much more fashionable, but we have really the same levels of corruption as well. So, what can we do about that? We can apply, as I say, a national cryptocurrency, and if that follows that assumption that over a period of 8 years we could reduce it by half, always we're going to see this debt problem, that would be a contributor. That would be a significant contribution to the global economy. The payments industry we talked about. It's carving about 5.5% of every retail transaction and not adding any value. If we were to reduce that with Bitcoin and blockchain-based technology, which inevitably will happen because it can provide the service at a far lower rate, so even if they get acquired by Visa or MasterCard, which is what seems to be happening, there's always going to be some independents that have much lower rates, so these rates are going to come down. So that's going to help a little bit as well. We're going to get a small lift from that. Same with remittances. People don't, we send $500 billion back to home countries in remittances, taxed at about 8, 9, 10% by the companies that provide that service. Easily replaced by blockchain, probably will happen over the next few years. And that, a small contribution, but an important one because it's the poorest sector of our economy in many ways. So now we can go on to think about some other areas where technology can help, and one of those is theft of IP. We can't do that much about the theft of physical goods because technology doesn't help us a lot there. But we have $1 trillion being stolen every year in the US in terms of intellectual property theft. If that number seems high, just think about the F-35 fighter program that was entirely taken over a period of just about a week, that we, the taxpayers, had invested about $499 billion, I think it was, in buildings, so that's $500 billion right there. So we're losing vast amounts through the theft of IP. And basically, there's a couple of ways we can stop that. Here's General Keith Alexander putting the number at $1 trillion a year. So Jonathan Evans from MI5 saying it's astonishing the level at which our IP is being stolen. It's an industrial scale level. And it's not just the large companies, it's small startups as well. It's a free-for-all, and it can be stopped. The technology exists to stop it. We don't need to take a lot of time on this. This is a recent history of cybersecurity. We started with the internet. We found there were some bad guys there. We introduced the firewall. The firewall worked for a bit. Then we started bringing our own devices into the enterprise. Then the enterprise started extending outside as we had SaaS services and infrastructure as a service. The firewall broke down, was no longer effective. And now it's being replaced by lots of small individual firewalls that protect each service. And this is the architecture that's known as software-defined perimeter. It's been accepted as a standard by the Cloud Security Alliance. It's had 5 hackathons. It's never once been breached. Each hackathon, they made it easier and easier. And in the last hackathon, they actually gave out the password. It was a regular Amazon account. It was owned by Bob Flores, the CTO of the CIA. Every day at noon, he would log on to his account with a video camera there, type in his password, Bob, and still no one was able to break into the account. So it can be protected now. And in fact, I've got a couple of slides on cybersecurity because I know I was supposed to talk on that topic. What software-defined perimeter has done basically, they've taken, it was a guy who worked in Special Operations Command, and he took the architecture that the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies use to protect data. Now you may think that's not a good idea, given the publicity around Manning and Snowden, but the system wasn't actually breached. In that case, it was an authorized insider, and there's technology separate for that. But he took the DoD architecture and made it much easier to use, much less expensive to use, made it exportable because there's problems with exporting strong encryption, and also made it dependable in that he got ACE insurance to guarantee anything that's protected with that technology. They will insure it. So basically, cybersecurity in 9 letters. To protect your data in motion, there's something called the software-defined perimeter. To protect your data at rest, there's something called fully homomorphic encryption. It's not a very catchy title for it, but what it is, it's a form of encryption where you can encrypt all your data and still search through it while it's encrypted. It sounds too good to be true, but it's actually possible. It actually works. An earlier algorithm is being run by IBM, but it's painfully slow. There's a new one coming out of New York that is 36,000 times faster than the IBM algorithm, and that should be with us shortly. And then to protect from the malicious insiders, the Snowden and the Chelsea Mannings, there's user behavior analytics. You just watch the pattern of people's behavior. If it starts changing, then you reduce their access. These 3 things together, it's possible to protect your IP so it's never breached. As I told you, there have been 5 hackathons of SDP, literally tens of billions of attacks. It's never been breached. We kept trying to make it easier each time. Each hackathon, we gave them more. The first one, we gave them the IP address. The second one, we gave them a reference architecture. The third one, we gave them a bulletin board so all the attackers could talk to each other about how best to attack us. And then the last one, as I said, Bob Flores said, okay, let's give them the password. And he just logged on so that they could see what the password was. They still didn't get it. I'll be happy to answer questions about SDP. I don't want to take too much time. So basically, if we stop that, that's quite a big contribution. As I say, we're losing $1 trillion a year. Assuming that other countries are losing at about a similar rate, we can be adding a few $1 trillion to the global economy just by fixing this. Now, the final point I'll make is about the illiquidity of IP. And I left it to last because I think this is the biggest factor, and I may be biased because this is the one that I'm most interested in right now and working on. And I think there's one data point that illustrates this quite well. I thought, let's look at a global balance sheet and a global income statement. Now, there's no such thing. There should be. The World Bank should be issuing them. But you can basically get the information from the World Bank and the Bank of International Settlements, and you can create them. So that's what I did. On the left is the global balance sheet. About $69 trillion worth of assets. By the way, all these numbers in trillions. We don't deal with anything less than trillions here. 69 trillion in assets, of which 87%, according to PwC and Ocean Toma, are intellectual assets. So 87% of our global economy is comprised of intellectual assets. So now let's look at the global income statement. We do about $41 trillion a year. How much of that is in intellectual assets? 87%? The same as the value? It's less than 1%. It's actually $365 billion. Less than 1% of this 41 trillion number. So the question is why? And that number comes basically out of nowhere too. It's only just started appearing in the last 10 years. This is 2 market indices, and this figure for worldwide IP royalty payments, which includes technology, payments, transfers, this kind of thing, comes from the World Bank. It's probably a little bit low, but it's the only decent number there is. But it's starting to grow. In just these last few years, it's up to a CAGR of 12.7% right now. So although it's a tiny amount, it's growing much faster than all the other asset classes. So if we want to save the global economy from a death spiral, this may be one of the contributing factors to do it. So we actually spent some time looking at why is the performance so bad. So one of the things we did is we drilled down a little bit more detail on the particular studies and data points we could get on this. Less than 1% of IP is ever licensed. So most of it is sitting there doing nothing. It's all supposed to be reported under the accounting rules. Less than 6% of it is ever actually reported. One area we do have some activity and motion with IP is theft. As we talked about, it's about $1 trillion a year. It comes out to about 4% of IP, 4 times as much as we license. And then this came from Lord Sainsbury's study. He was the British Minister of Innovation. And it's interesting now that quite a few countries are appointing a ministerial appointment for innovation. They now recognize it's sufficiently important to get up to a cabinet level. And he studied the issue, and he came to the conclusion that 30% of all R&D is totally wasted doing research that's already been done somewhere else, typically, or quite often, in the same organization. So given that we spend, as a community, about $1.6 trillion every year on R&D, that means we're just throwing away about $500 billion every year, reinventing what someone else has done. Why? Well, actually, one of the major reasons, we looked at quite a few of these, and one of the major ones is the next slide, but I'll give you a preview, is that when we have a new idea, most of the time we keep it secret. We know we should be socializing with lots of people. We need to talk to investors and partners and manufacturers and clients. But the reality is most of the time we keep it secret because we don't want our ideas being stolen by other people. So we actually spent some time looking at all the reasons why innovation and IP is so illiquid. Why is it so difficult for an idea to get from inception to realization? And one reason is no one uses anything to manage it. For the other asset classes, we use software. For physical assets, SAP started off as an inventory program, managing the physical assets. Oracle started off as an accounting program, managing the financial assets. HR was a personnel program, managing the human assets. But when it comes to the intellectual assets, there's nothing. There's a few docketing systems. Most companies just use an Excel spreadsheet. And I've worked with some Fortune 50s recently, and they have no idea what IP they have. I talked to a division of a top 50, Fortune 50 company, and they had no idea what IP they had. They thought they had about 7,000, 8,000 patents. Turned out they had a few less. It turned out they had quite a few they didn't even know they had. And when they gave us a dump from their docketing system, which was wrong, we then cleaned it up, came back, told them what they actually had. And then even then, the second realization, the first realization was most of these large multinationals with these huge patent portfolios have no idea what they own. And then even when we told them what they own, it turned out they had no idea what it was, because the guy who invented it is long gone, or they bought it in from somewhere else. And they didn't know how to find out what it was they had. So we've got these people sitting on these massive portfolios, tens of thousands of patents. And remember, each patent family costs about $200,000 over its lifetime, or $20,000 a year, and they have no idea what any of them do. So that was one of the problems. Another problem was it's difficult to market that which is usually secret, the one we talked about. The enterprise doesn't know what IP it has. And I'll give you a concrete example from that because I know he's talked about it publicly, so he's happy to talk about it. And one of my clients was the vice chairman at Chase Bank. Years back, he was interested in e-bill payment. And he thought, I wonder who in Chase, no, actually he thought, I wonder if anyone at Chase is looking at this as an opportunity for Chase. He started searching around and he found 53 different projects, all blissfully unaware of each other, all looking at e-bill payment. This is, by the way, why Lord Sainsbury's number of 30% being totally wasted is quite credible. So enterprises don't know what IP they have, ideas are stolen, innovation is difficult to inventory because the ideas keep changing and morphing and then combining with other ideas, so it's not like a simple inventory project. Best practices are rarely applied. Risk management is not available. We plan to change that, by the way, by giving patent litigation insurance for small companies, because at the moment, if you're a small company, you get a patent, and then you're infringed by a large company, there's not much you can do about it. You say, hey, you're infringing my patent. They say, okay, so sue us. And if you don't have an extra $10 million sitting around, there's really nothing you can do because you can't litigate without at least 5 or 10 million. We've worked with insurers to get insurance so that small companies can assert themselves. A small premium every year, they can assert their patents if someone does infringe them. And of course, the irony is that if they have IP insurance, it's much less likely that someone actually will infringe them. So it works out well for the insurers as well. An innovation community needs a critical mass, and licensing IP is expensive and time-consuming. And we need early-stage funding. Wrote a book on the topic. It got good reviews. People like Carl Icahn, Lee Iacocca, Sir David Cooksey, who is the chairman of the Bank of England, all wrote quite kind things about it. So that was what motivated us to get started and to actually write the software to address these problems, to bring liquidity to the IP marketplace. And I'll give you just a couple of modules, because I don't want to take too much time, and we can all get out of here a little early. But let's take what I think is the core problem. I call it the innovation paradox, the fact that we have a good idea, we know we should talk about it, but we keep it secret. So we did a small beta test with just 14 companies, and one of those companies developed micro UAVs. They were called NEMSET, short for nanomolecular semiconductor electrodynamic thrust. I suggested they change the name, they liked it, they stuck with it, and they did quite well, so I guess it was okay. But they had micro UAVs, they could control these tiny things the size of a semiconductor chip and move them around and fly them around. They were interested in a DoD grant. We'll come to that in a second. But the first thing a new member of the community does is they put in their interests. They're interested in UAVs, thrust, microlithography. But because they're interested in a DoD grant, which was out there, for a UAV that could go in and detect bacterial pathogens in a biowarfare scenario, they included microbial detection because they knew nothing about microbial detection. They knew everything about UAVs. So they wanted a partner they could work with who had this technology. Now, 2 weeks later, another company puts in their information, and that company was a company called BioVigilant. And as you probably can guess, they had technology for detecting bacterial pathogens. So what happened was, as soon as they enter that, these guys from NEMSET put their information and kept it completely confidential. Everyone has a choice of what level of access they want to set, and they can also specifically exclude any individuals or competitors they want to exclude, and they'll never be able to see it. So these guys were completely in lockdown mode, and so was BioVigilant. But they made one compromise that enabled them to become aware of each other's existence. They allowed a secure scan of encrypted keywords. We do it in such a way that you can't do keyword guessing to try and get some ideas of what people are working on. We made it so there's absolutely no compromise to any individual security. You can register your information, have it completely private for yourself, but if you just make this one concession, if someone is looking for your technology, they can find you. So in this case, they got a keyword saying microbial detection 1. All this told them was that someone, somewhere in this whole ecosystem that we were building, had technology related to microbial detection. They didn't know who it was, didn't know what it was. But they could click on this keyword and it would bring up a dialog box with which they could send a message to the owner of this microbial detection technology to see if they can get access to it. And they just send a simple message saying, pretty sure we're not a competitor, we do UAVs. We're interested in microbial detection for a DoD grant, would you want to work with us? And to speed up the process a little bit, they have the option of waiving their anonymity. Because all data starts off confidential by default, and every individual and organization starts off anonymous by default. They have to waive that if they want to. So they waive the anonymity and they get a response, and they're actually able to find each other, start working with each other, generate a license. We have modules that will generate licenses, and then create a virtual company that creates a joint venture project without having to go through the expense and the burden of actually forming a company, just to say that Harry gets 60% and William gets 40% or whatever the division is. They can just simply structure that contractually. Why waste money and time with government bureaucracy when you don't need to yet? So you can start up a small joint venture entity, define it through the license agreement. These are all the 28 modules of what we do. And now the question is, what difference could that make on liquidity? Well, we think it can make a substantial difference. It takes longer because we're starting from a very low base. When you've got less than 1%, it's a tiny base. But we think the existing growth curve of 12.7 CAGR can be doubled by applying the technology we've talked about. And it does seem to be working. As I say, we're testing it in Ukraine, 3 major universities, the Academy of Sciences, many research institutions, the Export-Import Bank, and for some reason the head of foreign intelligence. I don't know why they got involved, but basically we're testing it throughout Ukraine, and it's going quite well. It's working as we thought it should. So now, back to the core question of the whole talk. If we apply all of these technologies together, the blockchain, the cybersecurity, the cryptocurrency, and we address all of these problems, based on the assumptions we made, which are primitive, but hey, that's economics. Based on the assumptions we made, can we turn the tide and avert the problem, the death spiral that we're facing? That's the question. If we combine the impact of these promising technologies, will it be sufficient to save the world economy? And according to us, yes, it is. We do make it. This is the debt spiral, if you like, that we've been seeing on every slide, every graphical slide. These are all the technologies combined together, the lift that they would create, and this is a combination of debt and the technologies. So we're negative, negative, negative right up until about 24, and then we start going into fairly significant positive territory. So long as this doesn't happen faster than we expect it to happen, and so long as these technologies can be implemented quickly and effectively, I think the world economy will pull through. Just my opinion, but that's my thought. So that was it. That's what I wanted to cover. Harry, you got a problem?
I don't have a problem, but I have a question. I would hope we have maybe an analogy way to clarify if that's all possible. I'm always fascinated by this 87% and 1% statistic.
Yeah.
And I wonder how the 87%, in terms of the value that you talk about, I know it's by PricewaterhouseCoopers, I'm sure it's legitimate, but how do they have a methodology for how they calculate? Like the one example I can think of maybe, okay, the iPhone.
Yeah.
I think if Apple looks at their sales from the iPhone 1 to the iPhone 10, they can calculate however many tens of billions or hundreds of billions, and that's per unit they sold, right?
Yeah.
How does all the IPs of the iPhone that makes the iPhone possible over these years, how does that work into a certain percentage of the market capitalization of Apple? Is that where that 87% comes from, and then there's the disconnect?
Yeah, I did look at it specifically for cell phones. It was a few
some other thing?
years ago. There's something called the royalty stack. I mean, the cost of the phone is broken down into the hardware components, which is relatively small.
Right.
And then you've got the royalty stack. And I can't remember the exact numbers. I think it's maybe 80 to 100 or several hundred now patents that you have to pay royalty payments to. So that's the royalty stack. And that's where much of the value is. PwC's original methodology, I think, was to look at companies. I did a project with the project to see how compliant they were with the accounting rules that they have to report their IP. And in that we combed through the reports to Edgar. For the public companies, you can get some sense of their value. You can easily determine their physical assets. You can easily determine their financial assets. And I know some methods have taken the market value and then deducted that, and the balance is what they would call the intellectual value. It's a fairly crude method, but it roughly works because goodwill is often viewed as IP in and of itself. Goodwill was basically the accounting fudge factor to account for the enormous difference between the actual market value of the assets and the market value in the stock market, what have you. And they used to be very close, but over the last 20 years, they've diverged enormously. And it's that difference that is very roughly the 87% of value in the IP. Any other questions or anything? Or Alex?
What strategies do you have to help companies unlock this IP value? That they're typically very tight-lipped about it, right?
Yes. And that's why we go to great pains to allow them to keep it confidential. We, by the way, use our own system to source technology. One of our first clients was the City University of New York. They're the ones who have this new algorithm for fully homomorphic encryption, a small company called InfoShield. No one knows it exists, but they can be found through our system. And we ourselves found them and are using them. So we can actually encrypt all the data, keep it completely protected, but still allow people to search for keywords without compromising the confidentiality. I don't know if that addressed the issue, but it's one of the ways we do it. Any other questions? I know I'm between you and getting home. Okay. Thank you very much.